Jake Morrison sat in his office on the 47th floor of the Human Embassy building on Nexus Prime. The massive windows showed the sprawling alien city below, where hundreds of different species walked the crystal streets and floated through the air in their various forms of transport. 3 moons hung in the purple sky and cast strange shadows across the diplomatic quarter. Jake had been ambassador to the Galactic Council for 2 years now, and still found the view amazing every single day. The communication device on his desk began to flash red. Jake knew that red meant emergency transmission from human space. He pressed the activation button and the holographic display showed Admiral Lisa Carter standing on the bridge of the UES Defiance. Her face looked tired, and her uniform was dirty. Behind her, Jake could see crew members running back and forth and red warning lights flashing. "Jake, we have a serious problem," Lisa said without any greeting. "You need to get the council together right now. We are facing something that could destroy everything." Jake leaned forward in his chair. He had known Lisa for 15 years since their days in the military together. She never panicked and never called for help unless things were really bad. "What happened, Lisa? Tell me everything." Lisa looked over her shoulder and then back at the camera. 3 days ago, we lost contact with the mining colony on Kepler 7. We thought it was just equipment failure, so we sent Captain Ryan Brooks with a small patrol to check on them. What he found there was impossible. The holographic display changed to show footage from a ship's external cameras. Jake watched as a sleek human vessel approached a star system. Where there should have been planets and asteroids and the normal debris of space, there was nothing, just empty black void. Even the star itself looked dimmer than it should be. "The entire system is gone, Jake," Lisa continued. "Not destroyed, not blown up, just gone. Like something ate it and left nothing behind." Jake felt cold fear run down his spine. In all his years studying galactic history, he had never heard of anything that could make entire star systems disappear. "Are you sure the coordinates were right? Maybe Brooks made a navigation error." "I wish it was that simple," Lisa said. "Brooks checked the coordinates 5 times. He even found debris from the mining station floating in empty space. Then he detected movement." The video feed switched to show sensor readings. Jake could not understand all the technical data, but he could see large objects moving through the darkness where the planets used to be. The objects were huge, bigger than most space stations, and they moved in ways that did not follow normal physics. "We tried to scan them, but our sensors could not get clear readings," Lisa explained. "It was like they existed in our reality and somewhere else at the same time. Brooks ordered his ships to maintain distance, but one of the objects noticed them." Jake watched the screen as something that looked like living shadow reached out toward the human patrol ships. The moment it touched the smallest vessel, that ship simply vanished. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone like it had never existed at all. "Brooks got his remaining ships out of there as fast as possible," Lisa said. "But Jake, this thing or these things are moving toward the inner systems. At their current speed, they will reach populated worlds in less than 2 weeks." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Below him, the alien city continued its normal daily business. Traders from a dozen species sold goods in the market squares. Children from various races played in the parks. None of them knew that something was coming that could erase them all from existence. "Have you been able to identify what these things are?" Jake asked. "Dr. Karen Wells has been working with our xenobiology team," Lisa replied. "She thinks they match descriptions from some very old records, ancient stories that most people thought were just myths. They called them the Devourers." Jake had heard that name before in his studies of early galactic history. The Devourers were supposedly creatures from outside normal space that fed on entire worlds. Most scholars believed they were just stories that primitive civilizations made up to explain natural disasters. "I thought the Devourers were just legends." "So did we," Lisa said. But Karen found references in archives from 6 different species, all describing the same thing. Creatures that consume matter and energy and leave nothing behind. The last recorded sighting was over 1,000 years ago near the galactic rim. Then they just disappeared. "And now they are back," Jake said quietly. "It looks that way," Lisa confirmed. "Jake, we need the full resources of the Galactic Council. Every species, every fleet, every weapon system they have. This is not something humanity can handle alone." Jake knew Lisa was right, but he also knew how the council worked. Getting hundreds of different species to agree on anything took months of debate and negotiation. They did not have months. "I will call for an emergency session," he said, "but you know how these aliens think. They will want to study the threat and form committees and debate proper procedures. Then you need to make them understand that there is no time for their usual political games," Lisa said. "These things destroyed 3 entire star systems in less than a week. If we do not act fast, there will not be a galaxy left to save." Jake nodded. He had been a soldier before he became a diplomat, and part of him still thought like a soldier. Sometimes action mattered more than discussion. "I will get them together, Lisa. In the meantime, keep monitoring the situation and prepare our fleets for whatever comes next." "Already doing that," Lisa replied. "But Jake, there is something else you need to know. I have been in contact with General Pete Collins back on Earth. The military leadership is not waiting for council approval. If these aliens will not act fast enough, then humanity will have to go it alone." The transmission ended and Jake stared at the blank screen. He walked back to the window and looked out at the peaceful alien city. In a few hours he would have to tell representatives from hundreds of species that an ancient evil had returned to destroy them all. He would have to convince creatures who had spent centuries perfecting the art of careful deliberation that sometimes the only choice was to fight or die. Jake activated his communication system and began sending urgent messages to every council member. The emergency session would convene tomorrow morning. He just hoped it would not be too late. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy took their seats. Jake Morrison stood at the human delegation platform and watched as beings of every imaginable shape and size filled the massive chamber. The crystalline entities from the hegemony reflected the chamber lights in brilliant patterns, while the gas-formed nebulons floated in their containment suits near the ceiling. Ancient stone-like beings from the Granite Republic moved slowly to their positions, while quick-moving insectoid delegates from the hive worlds clicked and chittered among themselves. Chancellor Vex Tai of the Zalari Empire called the session to order. His tall, blue-skinned form stood behind the central podium, and his 4 arms gestured for silence. The Zalari had been the dominant power in the galaxy for over 3,000 years, and their word carried enormous weight in council decisions. "We have gathered for this emergency session at the request of the human delegation," he announced in his deep voice. "Ambassador Morrison, you may present your concerns." Jake walked to the speaking platform in the center of the hall. All around him, hundreds of alien eyes and sensors focused on his small human form. He activated the holographic display system and began showing the footage that Lisa Carter had sent him. The images of empty space where star systems should have been caused gasps and alarmed sounds from delegates throughout the chamber. "3 days ago, we lost contact with human colonies in the Outer Rim," Jake began. "When we investigated, we found this. Entire solar systems completely gone. Not destroyed, but consumed down to the last particle of matter." High Counselor Keth of the Crystalline Hegemony spoke next. His crystal body rang like bells when he moved. "This data is incomplete, Ambassador Morrison. How do we know these systems ever existed? Perhaps your navigation records are in error." Jake had expected this response. The older species always questioned human competence. "We have mining records, shipping manifests, and communication logs spanning 15 years, he replied. "These colonies were real and now they are gone." Dr. Karen Wells stepped forward from the human delegation area. As head xenobiologist for human space, she had studied every known species in the galaxy. "Honorable delegates, I have been researching this phenomenon in our historical archives. What we are seeing matches ancient records from 6 different civilizations, records that describe entities called the Devourers." A wave of concerned murmurs spread through the assembly. Most delegates had heard the old stories, but few believed them to be real. Senator Blythe of the Aquari Collective raised one of her tentacles to speak. "Dr. Wells, those are merely legends from primitive times. Stories created to explain natural phenomena that early civilizations could not understand." "I thought so too," Karen replied. "But the descriptions are identical across species that had no contact with each other. Creatures that exist, partially, outside normal spacetime. Beings that consume matter and energy and convert it into something else entirely." something that leaves no trace behind. Commander Steve Parker stepped up beside Jake. His military uniform stood out among the flowing robes and ceremonial garments worn by most alien delegates. Whatever these things are, they are moving toward populated systems at incredible speed. Our tactical analysis shows they will reach the inner colonies within 2 weeks. Chancellor Vextai raised one of his hands for attention. Even if we accept that this threat is real, we must respond with wisdom and caution. The Zilari Empire suggests forming a joint research committee to study the phenomenon. We should gather more data before taking any rash actions. Jake felt frustration building in his chest. This was exactly what he had feared would happen. Chancellor, with respect, we do not have time for research committees. These creatures destroyed 3 star systems in 5 days. Every hour we delay means more worlds could be consumed. Representative Korth of the Machine Intelligence Collective spoke in his electronic voice. Our probability calculations indicate a 73% chance that defensive measures will prove adequate. We recommend evacuating threatened systems and establishing fortified positions around core worlds. Evacuate to where? Jake asked. If these things can consume entire star systems, then there is nowhere to run. We have to stop them before they grow stronger. The debate continued for hours. Delegate after delegate stood to offer their species' perspective on the crisis. The methane breathers suggested hiding in gas giant atmospheres. The deep dwellers wanted to retreat to underground cities. The nomad fleets proposed scattering throughout empty space until the threat passed. Jake listened to proposal after proposal for running and hiding and waiting. None of these ancient civilizations seemed capable of considering direct action against the threat. They had grown comfortable during centuries of peace and prosperity. The idea of actually fighting something that could not be negotiated with or bought off seemed foreign to them. During a brief recess, Jake met with his human delegation in a private conference room. Commander Parker paced back and forth across the small space. This is insane, Jake. These aliens are going to debate until the Devourers eat half the galaxy. Dr. Wells looked up from her datapad. I have been monitoring the discussions. Every species is proposing defensive measures or retreat options. None of them are talking about offensive action. They are scared, Jake said quietly. These civilizations have been the dominant powers for thousands of years. They have forgotten what it means to face an existential threat. When the session resumed, Chancellor Vextai announced the preliminary consensus. The Council agrees to establish a joint research committee to study the threat. We will also begin evacuating non-essential populations from outer rim systems. A task force will be formed to investigate defensive options. Jake stood up at the human platform. Chancellor, how long will this research committee take to reach conclusions? Such important decisions cannot be rushed, Ambassador Morrison. We estimate 6 to 8 months for a thorough analysis. 6 months, Jake repeated. He looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces. Some showed concern, others showed the calm confidence of beings who had never faced real danger. In 6 months, these creatures will have consumed dozens of star systems and billions of lives. That is an unfortunate but necessary cost of proper procedure, High Counselor Keith replied. We cannot base galactic policy on panic and speculation. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. These beings were willing to let entire civilizations die rather than take decisive action. They valued their careful, deliberative process more than the lives at stake. He thought about Admiral Carter and her tired face. He thought about Captain Brooks and his crew, who had watched their comrade simply vanish from existence. I see, Jake said slowly. So the Council position is to study and debate while worlds burn. Ambassador Morrison, your emotional response is understandable but not helpful, Chancellor Vextai replied. The Council will address this threat through proper channels and established procedures. Jake looked around the chamber one more time. He saw wisdom and experience and caution. What he did not see was the courage to act when action was needed. These aliens had grown so comfortable with their power that they had forgotten how to use it. They would rather be right than be fast, and in this case being slow meant death for billions. Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss, Jake said. He turned and walked out of the chamber with his delegation following behind him. As the doors closed, he could hear Chancellor Vextai calling the session back to order to begin forming the research committee. Outside in the corridor, Commander Parker grabbed Jake's arm. "What are we going to do now?" Jake looked back at the closed doors of the Grand Assembly Hall. Inside those doors, hundreds of the most powerful beings in the galaxy were about to spend months debating while an ancient evil consumed everything in its path. "We do what humans have always done, Steve. We handle it ourselves." The secure conference room beneath the human embassy was designed to block all forms of electronic surveillance. Jake Morrison sat at the head of a metal table and looked at the three people he trusted most in the galaxy. Commander Steve Parker sat to his right, checking his military data pad for the latest reports from human space. Dr. Karen Wells occupied the chair across from him, organizing her research files about the Devourer threat. The third person surprised most observers who knew about the meeting. Ambassador Liu Chen represented the independent human colony of New Shanghai. Her colony had broken away from Earth government control 20 years ago and established itself as a separate political entity. Most people assumed she would be the last person Jake would call for help in a crisis. Those people did not understand how humans thought about existential threats. "Thank you all for coming," Jake began. "What I am about to share with you cannot leave this room. If word gets out, it could destroy humanity's position in the Galactic Council permanently." Liu leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Jake, if we are all going to be eaten by ancient space monsters, then I doubt our diplomatic standing will matter much." Steve looked up from his data pad. "The latest reports from Admiral Carter are not good. The Devourers have consumed 2 more systems since yesterday. They are definitely moving toward populated areas." Karen opened one of her files and spread photographs across the table. "I have been analyzing every piece of historical data I can find about these creatures. The pattern is always the same. They appear suddenly, consume everything in their path, and then vanish for centuries or millennia. No one has ever successfully fought them, that we know of," Jake said quietly. "But there is something the Council does not know about humanity's activities since we joined the galactic community." Jake activated a hidden panel in the conference table, and a holographic display appeared above their heads. The display showed detailed schematics of weapon systems that none of them had seen before. Ships with unusual hull configurations and weapon arrays that looked nothing like standard human military equipment. 50 years ago, when humanity first made contact with alien civilizations, our government created a classified project, Jake explained. Project Omega was tasked with studying every major threat that had ever faced galactic civilization, while our diplomats were learning about trade agreements and cultural exchange protocols. Our military scientists were preparing for the worst possible scenarios. Steve stared at the holographic displays. As a career military officer, he thought he knew about every classified human project. "I have never seen these designs before. What kind of ships are these?" "The Shadow Fleet," Jake replied. "Officially, these vessels do not exist. They are built in secret shipyards using materials and technologies that we borrowed, acquired, or developed independently. Each ship is crewed by volunteers from various human colonies and equipped with weapons specifically designed to fight threats that conventional forces cannot handle." Liu whistled softly as she examined the schematics. "These weapon systems are incredible. Kinetic bombardment arrays that can punch through planetary shields. Nuclear fusion torpedoes that burn at temperatures hot enough to damage subspace itself. Where did we get this technology?" "Some of it we developed ourselves," Jake explained. "Humans have always been good at making weapons. Some of it we traded for or stole from other species when they were not paying attention. And some of it came from studying the wreckage of ancient battles that other civilizations forgot about." Karen pointed to one of the ship designs. "This configuration is unlike anything in our standard fleet. It looks almost organic." "That is the UES Retribution," Jake said. "Flagship of the Shadow Fleet commanded by Captain Nicole Turner. The hull is grown rather than built using biotechnology. We acquired from a dead species we found in the outer rim. It can repair itself in combat and adapt to different types of attacks." Steve was studying tactical displays that showed fleet positions throughout human space. How many ships are we talking about, Jake? What is the actual size of this shadow fleet? 237 combat vessels, Jake replied, plus support ships, supply vessels, and mobile repair facilities. The entire force is roughly equivalent to 3 standard battle fleets, but with capabilities that far exceed anything else in the galaxy. Liu leaned forward across the table. And all of this has been hidden from the Galactic Council for 50 years. What happens when they find out we have been lying to them? They will be furious, Jake admitted. They will accuse us of planning conquest or preparing for war against other council members. Some species will demand that humanity be expelled from the galaxy entirely. But, Karen said slowly, if these ships can actually fight the Devourers, then none of that matters. Jake nodded. Project Omega identified the Devourers as the single greatest threat to galactic civilization based on historical records. Every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every piece of technology in the Shadow Fleet was designed with fighting them in mind. The holographic display changed to show detailed analysis of Devourer capabilities based on ancient records and recent observations. Jake pointed to various data points as he explained the human strategy. Most galactic civilizations use energy-based weapons, he said. Plasma cannons, particle beams, directed energy systems that manipulate electromagnetic forces. But the Devourers exist partially outside normal spacetime. Energy weapons pass through them or get absorbed and converted into something else. Steve began to understand. So we built kinetic weapons, physical projectiles that impact through direct force rather than energy transfer. Exactly, Jake confirmed. Railgun systems that fire solid slugs at significant fractions of light speed. Nuclear fusion warheads that create massive kinetic explosions rather than energy releases. Even our shields work differently using gravitational manipulation instead of energy fields. Karen was reading through technical specifications on her datapad. This is brilliant. If the Devourers feed on energy, then kinetic attacks should be able to damage them. But how do we know this will actually work? We do not, Jake admitted. This is all theoretical based on historical analysis and educated guessing, but it is the best chance we have. Liu stood up and walked to the holographic display. She reached out as if she could touch the ship schematics floating in the air. What you are proposing is incredibly risky, Jake. If the Shadow Fleet fails, then humanity will have revealed all our secrets for nothing. The other species will know we have been deceiving them, and we will still face extinction from the Devourers. And, if we do nothing, Steve said, the Devourers will consume the galaxy while the Council spends months debating proper research procedures. At least this way we have a chance. Jake looked at each of his companions. These 3 people represented different aspects of humanity in the galaxy. Steve was the military officer who understood the necessity of decisive action. Karen was the scientist who valued knowledge, but recognized when theory had to become practice. Liu was the independent colonist who had chosen freedom over safety and understood the cost of difficult decisions. I am going to contact General Pete Collins and Admiral Carter, Jake said. The Shadow Fleet will move into position to intercept the Devourers before they reach populated systems. But first I need to address the Galactic Council one more time. What will you tell them? Karen asked. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. I am going to give them one last chance to act like leaders instead of bureaucrats. And when they refuse, I am going to tell them exactly what humanity thinks about their careful, deliberative process. Liu grinned. That should be an interesting conversation. It will be, Jake agreed. Because after tomorrow, the galaxy is going to know that humans do not wait for permission to do what is necessary. We act first and deal with the consequences later. Steve closed his datapad and looked directly at Jake. And if the other species decide to retaliate against us for acting without council approval, then they can form a committee to study the problem, Jake replied, right after we finish saving their lives. The Grand Assembly Hall filled once again as delegates returned for the 3rd day of emergency deliberations about the Devourer threat. Jake Morrison watched from the human delegation platform as Chancellor Vextai called the session to order. The past 2 days had been filled with endless debates about research protocols, committee structures, and bureaucratic procedures. Meanwhile, reports continued to arrive of more star systems vanishing from existence. The Council has made significant progress in organizing our response to this crisis, Chancellor Vextai announced. The Joint Research Committee has been formally established with representatives from 12 major species. The Evacuation Planning Subcommittee has begun preliminary discussions about refugee resettlement procedures. The Defense Analysis Working Group is scheduled to present their initial findings next month. Jake listened to the Chancellor List Committee, after committee that had been formed to study various aspects of the problem. Each group would spend weeks or months debating their specific area of responsibility, while the Devourers continued consuming inhabited worlds. The careful, deliberative process that these aliens valued so highly was going to get billions of innocent beings killed. I now call upon High Counselor Keith to present the preliminary recommendations of the Threat Assessment Panel, the Chancellor continued. The crystalline being moved to the central speaking platform, and his faceted body reflected the chamber lights in brilliant patterns. Honored delegates, our analysis indicates that immediate evacuation of outer rim systems represents the most prudent course of action. We recommend establishing defensive perimeters around core worlds, while our research teams develop long-term solutions to the threat. More evacuation plans and defensive positions and research teams, Jake thought. The same responses that dozens of species had proposed over the past 3 days. No one was talking about actually fighting the Devourers. No one seemed capable of considering offensive action against an enemy that could not be reasoned with or negotiated away. Are there any questions or comments regarding these recommendations? Chancellor Vextai asked. Jake stood up at the human platform. I request permission to address the Council. The Chancellor looked annoyed. Humans had already spoken several times during the deliberations, and their requests for immediate military action had been politely dismissed. Very well, Ambassador Morrison, but please keep your remarks brief. We have much important business to conclude today. Jake walked slowly to the central speaking platform. All around him, hundreds of alien beings watched with expressions ranging from mild interest to obvious impatience. These creatures represented civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They considered themselves wise and experienced and superior to the young, aggressive humans who had joined their community only 50 years ago. Honored delegates, I stand before you today, not as a supplicant seeking your approval, but as a representative of humanity, delivering a final message, Jake began. His voice carried clearly through the vast chamber, and delegates leaned forward to hear what the human had to say. For 3 days, I have listened to your debates about committees and procedures and proper protocols. I have heard your careful discussions about evacuation plans and defensive strategies in long-term research projects. I have watched as you demonstrated the wisdom and patience and deliberative skill that has made your civilizations great. Chancellor Vextai smiled slightly. Perhaps the human was finally learning to show proper respect for established galactic procedures. Jake continued in a calm, measured tone. Your achievements are remarkable. The Zalari Empire has maintained stability across thousands of worlds for 3 millennia. The crystalline hegemony has advanced scientific knowledge in ways that benefit every species in the galaxy. The Aquari Collective has preserved peace through diplomatic excellence that humans can barely comprehend. Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. The delegates appreciated recognition of their accomplishments and historical contributions to galactic civilization. But, Jake said, and his tone began to change, there is something your wisdom and experience and careful deliberation cannot provide. There is something that all your committees and research teams and procedural discussions will never give you. The chamber fell silent. Jake looked around at hundreds of alien faces and saw confusion beginning to replace the earlier approval. Time, Jake said simply. You do not have time. While you debate the proper formation of research committees, the Devourers consume entire star systems. While you discuss evacuation procedures, billions of innocent beings die. While you plan defensive strategies, an ancient enemy grows stronger with every world it devours. Chancellor Vextai raised one of his hands. Ambassador Morrison, we appreciate human concern, but hasty action without proper planning leads to disaster. Wisdom requires patience. Wisdom without courage is merely elaborate cowardice, Jake replied. His voice began to rise and carry through the chamber with increasing force. You have grown so comfortable in your power that you have forgotten how to use it. You have become so wise that you can no longer recognize when the time for wisdom has passed and the time for action has arrived. High Counselor Keith stepped forward. These accusations are inappropriate, Ambassador Morrison. The Council follows established procedures that have maintained galactic peace for centuries, and those procedures will maintain galactic peace right up until the moment the Devourers consume the last inhabited world, Jake shot back. Tell me, Counselor, exactly how much of the galaxy needs to be devoured before your research committees finish their analysis. Jake activated the holographic display system and images appeared above the assembly, showing the Shadow Fleet. Hundreds of uniquely designed human warships moved through space in perfect formation. The alien delegates gasped and pointed as they realized they were seeing military technology unlike anything in the official human fleet. For 50 years, while your species focused on trade and cultural exchange, humanity prepared for this exact scenario, Jake announced. We studied every major threat in galactic history. We developed weapons and tactics specifically designed to fight enemies that your conventional forces cannot touch. We built a fleet that officially does not exist, crewed by volunteers who understand that sometimes survival requires action rather than discussion. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Delegates shouted questions and accusations in dozens of different languages. Chancellor Vextai demanded silence, but the noise continued to grow. Jake raised his voice above the chaos. The human Shadow Fleet is moving to intercept the Devourers at the Kepler Junction. We will engage them with kinetic weapons and nuclear, fusion torpedoes and gravitational manipulation systems that can actually damage beings existing partially outside normal spacetime. This is outrageous, Chancellor Vextai shouted. The Council has not authorized military action. You cannot act unilaterally against galactic threats. Watch us, Jake replied. He looked around the chamber at hundreds of furious alien faces. Some showed anger at human deception, while others displayed fear at the implications of independent action. A few delegates looked almost relieved that someone was finally willing to fight. We came to you as allies, hoping for unity in the face of existential threat. Instead, we found fear disguised as prudence and cowardice, wrapped in the language of wisdom. You prefer to maintain proper procedures rather than save lives. You would rather be right than be fast, and in this case being slow means death for billions of innocent beings. Jake walked closer to the Chancellor platform and looked directly at the tall blue alien who had led the galaxy for over a century. So humanity will do what must be done. We will fight the Devourers with or without your approval. We will risk our lives and our ships and our future to protect civilizations that refuse to protect themselves. Commander Angela Davis watched from the visitor gallery above the main chamber floor. She activated a hidden communication device and sent a coded signal across the galaxy. In secret bases throughout human space, the Shadow Fleet received confirmation of their orders. Captain Nicole Turner aboard the UES Retribution acknowledged the signal and began final preparations for combat. When we succeed, Jake continued, and we will succeed because failure is not an option. Humanity will have earned its place in this galaxy through deed rather than diplomacy. And when the next existential threat emerges, the galaxy will know which species to turn to for leadership. Jake turned and began walking toward the exit. The human delegation followed him, while alien voices continued shouting questions and demands behind them. As they reached the chamber doors, Jake stopped and looked back one final time. The age of endless deliberation is over, he called out. The time for war has come. The aftermath of Jake Morrison's declaration split the galaxy in ways that no one had anticipated. Within hours of his speech to the Galactic Council, emergency sessions convened on dozens of worlds as species leaders debated how to respond to humanity's unilateral action. Some condemned the humans as dangerous warmongers who threatened the stability of galactic civilization. Others secretly admired their courage to act when others would only talk. Chancellor Vextai called for immediate sanctions against all human colonies and demanded that the Shadow Fleet stand down before reaching the Devourer intercept point. The Zalari Empire had not been defied so openly in over 1,000 years, and their pride demanded swift retaliation against human insubordination. High Counselor Keth supported the sanctions and added his own demands for full disclosure of all classified human military projects, but not all voices joined the chorus of condemnation. Ambassador Irith of the young Saurian Republic stood before her planetary council and argued that humanity showed the kind of leadership that the galaxy desperately needed. The Wanderer clans who lived in deep space aboard generation ships sent messages of support for human courage in the face of bureaucratic paralysis. Even some members of the older species began to question whether their careful, deliberative processes were adequate for dealing with existential threats. Admiral Lisa Carter received reports of the political chaos while her fleet moved toward the intercept coordinates at maximum speed. The UES Defiance led a formation of conventional human warships, while Captain Nicole Turner and the Shadow Fleet maintained positions several light years away. The plan required precise timing and coordination between forces that had never worked together in actual combat. "Admiral, we are receiving multiple transmission from Galactic Council forces," reported Lieutenant Gary Walsh from the communication station. "They are ordering us to halt our advance and return to human space immediately." Lisa studied the tactical displays showing Devourer movement toward inhabited systems. 2 more star systems had vanished during the night, and long-range sensors detected the creatures continuing their advance toward populated worlds. "Send a reply, Lieutenant. Tell them we are engaged in humanitarian rescue operations and cannot comply with their request." Captain Ryan Brooks had recovered from his earlier encounter with the Devourers and now commanded a reconnaissance squadron tasked with gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities. His ships used advanced stealth technology borrowed from the Shadow Fleet to observe the creatures from a safe distance. "Admiral, we have visual contact with the main Devourer formation," Brooks reported over secure channels. "They are massive beyond anything we imagined. The smallest ones are larger than our biggest space stations, and the largest ones are the size of small moons." Dr. Karen Wells monitored the reconnaissance data from her laboratory aboard the UES Defiance. Her analysis of Devourer physiology, based on long-range scans, confirmed her worst fears about their capabilities. "Admiral, these creatures exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously," she reported. "They can phase in and out of normal space-time, which explains why conventional weapons have no effect on them." The first engagement took place at the Kepler Junction exactly as Jake had predicted. The Shadow Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, with Captain Turner's bioorganic flagship leading the assault. The Devourers detected their approach immediately and began moving to intercept the human vessels. "All ships, this is Turner," the captain announced over fleet communications. "Remember that these things feed on energy, so keep your shields at minimum power. Rely on kinetic barriers and gravitational deflection. Target the largest creatures first and concentrate your fire." The battle that followed defied every principle of conventional space warfare. The Devourers moved through space like living shadows, consuming everything they touched, while the human ships fired solid projectiles and nuclear fusion torpedoes at targets that seemed to exist only partially in their reality. Explosions that should have destroyed enemy vessels barely slowed them down, while kinetic impacts actually caused visible damage. Colonel Matt Harrison led the Storm Corps Ground Assault Division in a desperate attempt to board one of the smaller Devourers and plant nuclear charges inside its core structure. His soldiers used powered armor designed to function in environments where normal physics no longer applied. Half of his team vanished the moment they made contact with the creature's hull, but the survivors managed to penetrate its interior defenses. "This thing is bigger inside than outside," Harrison reported as his team moved through corridors that twisted through impossible geometries. "It's like we're walking through a living nightmare that doesn't follow any rules we understand." Durain. Nuclear charges detonated deep within the Devourer's core structure, and for the first time in recorded history, one of the ancient creatures actually died. Its death scream echoed across multiple dimensions and caused every other Devourer in the system to suddenly focus their attention on the human fleet. Admiral Carter arrived with conventional forces just as the Shadow Fleet began taking serious casualties. The UES Defiance and her escort ships joined the battle using modified weapon systems that Dr. Wells had hastily redesigned based on combat data. The arrival of reinforcements turned the tide, but at enormous cost in human lives. Captain Brooks watched from his reconnaissance position as the UES Retribution suffered critical damage from a Devourer attack that partially phased the ship out of normal space. Half of Captain Turner's crew simply ceased to exist, while the other half found themselves trapped in a vessel that flickered between realities. "All ships, this is Brooks," he announced. "The Retribution is in trouble. I'm moving." "To assist." "Negative, Brooks," Admiral Carter replied. "Maintain your position and continue intelligence gathering. We cannot afford to lose our reconnaissance capability." But Brooks had already committed his squadron to a rescue attempt. His ships fired everything they had at the Devourer attacking Turner's flagship and managed to drive it back long enough for emergency teams to evacuate the surviving crew members. Captain Turner was among the casualties, having died when her bioorganic ship partially merged with her nervous system during the dimensional phase shift. The battle raged for 6 hours before the surviving Devourers finally retreated toward the galactic rim. Humanity had achieved something that no other species had ever managed, but the victory came at a terrible price. 37 Shadow Fleet vessels were destroyed or lost in dimensional rifts. Over 8,000 human crew members died in the engagement, and many more suffered injuries that conventional medicine could not treat. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than official government communications. Species that had condemned human aggression suddenly began requesting details about weapons technology and tactical procedures. The Aquari Collective quietly contacted Jake Morrison to discuss possible military cooperation agreements. Even Chancellor Vexty sent private messages acknowledging that humanity had achieved something remarkable. But the political aftermath was far from simple. The revelation of the Shadow Fleet created a crisis of trust between humanity and other Council species. Some demanded full disclosure of all classified human projects, while others worried about what other secrets humanity might be hiding. The careful balance of galactic politics shifted as younger species began looking to humans for leadership, instead of the ancient powers who had dominated for millennia. Jake Morrison found himself in an impossible position. Humanity had saved the galaxy from immediate destruction, but at the cost of their reputation for diplomatic reliability. Some species wanted to expel humans from the Council entirely, while others wanted to make humanity the dominant military power in the galaxy. "We did what was necessary," Jake told the emergency council session that convened 1 week after the battle. "We acted when others would not act. We fought when others would not fight. We paid the price that others were unwilling to pay." Chancellor Vexti stood at the central podium looking older than his 3 centuries of life. The Devourer crisis had shaken his confidence in traditional galactic governance and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of careful deliberation. "Ambassador Morrison, your actions were unauthorized and dangerous," he said slowly. "But they were also necessary and successful. The Council must now decide how to proceed in light of these new realities." The debate continued for days, but the outcome was inevitable. Humanity had proven that sometimes survival required action rather than discussion. When the next existential threat emerged, the galaxy would turn to the species that had shown the courage to fight when fighting was needed. Jake looked out at the alien city below his embassy office windows and saw a changed world. The careful order of galactic civilization had been disrupted, but perhaps that disruption was necessary. Perhaps the time for endless committees and research projects and bureaucratic procedures was finally ending. The age of human leadership in the galaxy had begun, and it had been purchased with the blood of heroes who understood that some prices are worth paying